Well, a high-stakes moment in President Donald Trump's trade wars. With the 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs set to expire on Wednesday, investors will be keenly awaiting to see what happens next. Mr. Trump says his administration will begin sending out letters today to all U.S. trading partners without a deal in place. So Trump's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said earlier he expects several announcements on deals to come over the next 48 hours. Well, the bell ringing on Wall Street to welcome in the trading week. This all comes as the president takes to social media with another tariff threat. He warns that the US will impose an additional 10% levy on any country aligned with what he calls the anti-American policies of the BRICS nations. Well, CNN senior reporter Matt Egan following the latest from New York. These markets have opened mixed. It is 9:30 on Wall Street. We'll let these markets just settle in before we get our viewers a sense of exactly what's going on. But they are reflecting, as far as I can tell, what the futures markets indicated, which was a mixed to weaker opening. In fact, they all look as if they are down at this point. Let's talk about these letters being sent to scores of countries by Donald Trump. Who's getting these letters? And do we know what they say exactly?
Becky, not really, other than the expectation that the letters are going to include a new tariff rate, potentially as high as that April 2nd liberation tariff rate, the one that freaked out investors around the world. Look, this is just the latest chapter in what has already been a very chaotic trade war, right? That has confused CEOs and small business owners and, of course, investors across the world. Obviously, U.S. stock markets opening slightly lower, not a dramatic drop here. But look, this is shaping up to be a significant week in the trade war. A number of key events here, starting today, as the president says that beginning at noon Eastern time in New York, tariff letters are going to start going out, although it doesn't sound like all of them necessarily go out today. This comes ahead of Wednesday's deadline, right? That's when the 90-day pause expires. This is 90 days from April 9th, when the president paused those Liberation Day tariffs that really unnerved investors. The pause sent U.S. stocks skyrocketing. What's notable, though, is that over the weekend, U.S. officials, they announced that the new tariffs, the ones that are going to be announced in these letters, they're not going to take effect immediately. The expectation is that they would take effect August 1st. So that really sets another deadline in what is already a manufactured crisis of sorts, right? Because now, even though there's going to be new letters going out, it's not like the rates take effect, which of course allows for even more time for negotiation and possibly even more delays. Now, some investors and some analysts who are watching this are frustrated by just how haphazard everything has been. Greg Valliere is a policy strategist. He wrote a note over the weekend that said, back to confusion. It's not clear when tariffs will take effect as President Trump and cabinet officials seemingly return to the head-spinning ad hoc policies that upset markets in the spring. And he noted cabinet officials, in his view, were incomprehensible this weekend. And so, Becky, now we wait and we watch to see what these letters say, how high rates tariffs are going to ultimately go, and whether or not this new date of August 1st allows for some time and some negotiation to come up with new trade agreements. Becky?
Kicking the can down what has been already a pretty chaotic road. Yet another threat from Mr. Trump. This time he's calling for more tariffs on nations who are, as he describes them, aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of the BRICS group, which includes, amongst others, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, with some new recruits, including the UAE. Do we have any specifics on that at this point?
Not really. Look, this revives a threat that the president had made a few months ago, where he went after the BRICS nations over what he views as a threat to the U.S. dollar, although a lot of analysts don't really see that threat there and don't see the dollar's dominance really threatened. But in this Truth Social post, last night, the president said that any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of BRICS will be charged an additional 10% tariff. There will be no exceptions to this policy. So it's a little bit of a different threat, because in the past, I think he had really threatened nations that are part of BRICS. Now he's saying any country that's aligned with BRICS. So that could open up the universe of countries that would get this additional 10% tariff. But I mean, this is significant because let's say the U.S. reaches a deal with India and says, okay, India is going to have a 15% tariff rate based on those reciprocal tariffs. Well, that 15% rate, according to this Truth Social post that says there's no exceptions, that 15% rate would actually go up to 25%, which is much, much higher, of course. So there's a lot here to unpack, and as always, we have to see whether or not this threat actually gets carried through and whether or not that lasts or if it gets walked back again. I think it's interesting that markets seem to be taking a lot of this uncertainty in stride, with U.S. stocks opening the day in the red, but not dramatically lower. Becky?
Yeah, good to have you. Thank you. First trading day, of course, after Thursday last week. Friday closed for July the 4th. So out of the gate, slightly weaker, but not significantly so today. Thank you. Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed the summit of world leaders at the BRICS conference in Brazil on Sunday. He did so by video link because of an ICC arrest warrant alleging war crimes in connection to Russia's war with Ukraine. The BRICS collection of countries is now wrapping up an annual meeting in Rio de Janeiro. Putin told them that fundamental changes are happening in the world because liberal globalization, he said, has, quote, exhausted itself, and saying it's important to increase trade in national currencies. CNN's Claire Sebastian joining me now from London. And you've been monitoring what's been going on at this annual summit. Look, I mean, you and I have known each other long enough to have been around pretty much when this term was first coined. And it was a sort of loose grouping of emerging economies at the time. It's not like a G7 or a G20. I mean, this is a loosely aligned group, but they do certainly have aspirations for more and ambition for more. And they've been taking on more members. What have been the big takeaways from what is this annual summit this year in Brazil?
Yeah, Becky, this is the second time that we've seen the BRICS meet for an annual summit with this new expanded format. It essentially doubled in size last year to include those new members, and part of that was to try to present itself with greater global influence, greater global heft, to be a counterpoint, essentially, both economically and, I think, ideologically as well, to the United States. I think there are more challenges this year than there were last year. Of course, the trade war that you and Matt were discussing, the difficult balancing act that creates for some of the members of sort of providing this counterweight to the US, while at the same time trying to negotiate favorable trade terms. India, for example, definitely treading that fine line. And then we have the tensions in the Middle East that mean that some of the national leaders that were expected in Rio are not there. Iran's president, Egypt's president, to name a few. And of course, we see President Putin having to appear via video link for entirely different reasons because of that ICC arrest warrant. But I think, look, despite those challenges, this is still an alliance that is clearly trying to increase its influence in the world. And if you look at the communique, it's really not holding back when it comes to criticizing the US without actually naming the US. We see criticism of the tariffs. We see criticism of the strikes on Iran, which, of course, the US joined together with Israel. And we see them expressing alarm at increased military spending, which is, of course, something that the US has made a signature policy when it comes to the rest of NATO. So I think with that, it's definitely signaling that it wants to continue to try to take on what they call the sort of the hegemony of the United States-led global order. And we see this constant refrain around multilateralism, Becky.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Iran, one of the new members, of course, alongside Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, and the UAE. Good to have you. Thank you.